Okay, we are now going to start. I want to welcome everyone to the Reimagine LA Budget Town Hall. I am Kiana Tyson. I will be your moderator for today. The Reimagine LA Coalition and our partners have analyzed the LA County recommended budget for fiscal year 2024 to 2025. Today we will talk about what's in the LA County's recommended budget and what that means for the community. We hope that this meeting serves as an opportunity for the community to learn about the Chief Executive Office recommended budget, learn ways to improve the budget, and get involved with budget advocacy. Just a brief overview of today's agenda. We will have a land acknowledgement. We will also have an overview of the budget cycle, what's in the budget, and what it means for justice reinvestment work. We will also have public comment training, and we have a section for Q&A for those who have questions. We will now begin this meeting with the land acknowledgement from Maria Gonzalez from Youth Justice Coalition.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to an amazing town hall. My name is Maria Gonzalez, and I am an Angelino that lives in LA, been in LA for 20 years. First and foremost, I am first-generation immigrant. I am the legal community support coordinator over at Youth Justice Coalition. I am the founder of Pride and Truth, and I am here to acknowledge the most important part of our whole entire life of why we're here, our land and labor acknowledgement. This land, which we inhabit, is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Tongva, Chumash, and Gabrielino people. We pay respect to the Tongva, Chumash, Gabrielino, and all Indigenous people, past, present, and future, and honor their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora. We respectfully acknowledge our debt to the enslaved people, primarily of African descent, whose labor and suffering built and grew the economy and infrastructure of a nation that refused to recognize their humanity. We recognize our debt to exploited workers, past and present, whose labor was and continues to be stolen through unjust practices. We acknowledge our collective debt to the Indigenous people of this land and whose labor was forced and exploited. We recognize the immigrant and American-born workers of African, Asian, and Central and South American descent whose labor remains hidden in the shadows, but still contributes to the well-being of our collective community. I also would like to honor the four directions, north, east, south, and the west, our ancestry, present, and future compass for our direction of the journey we have to help our communities of Los Angeles. As a first-generation immigrant with two parents that migrated to America for the American dream, it is an honor to be here, to be part of Los Angeles County, and be part of this important discussion on how we can hold accountability on things that we are worthy of, because our ancestor made it happen for us. So it is our duty to continue. With that being said, I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for honoring the land that we do sit on. I now invite Megan Castillo, the Policy and Advocacy Manager at La Defensa, to give us an overview of the budget cycle.
Thank you so much, Kiana. Good evening, everyone. I am Megan Castillo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Policy and Advocacy Manager at La Defensa, as well as the Coalition Coordinator for the Reimagine LA Coalition. I'm going to be talking to you all a little bit about why budget advocacy. Why do we engage in some of the most unsexy work that there is? And part of the reason why we engage in budget advocacy is because our budgets truly do serve as ethical blueprints, right? And mirror a defined set of principles, and they really uplift what our values are as people, right? So whether it's the county's budget overall or just your individual budget for your household, right? It really speaks to what you value. And so scrutinizing the budgets at various governmental levels really reveals the focal point of our policymakers' intentions. And also, it's important to engage in budget advocacy because our budgetary decisions ultimately have great influence on our daily lives, both shaping the breadth of our societal support systems and really speaking to the availability of essential services and the magnitude of punitive structures within our current infrastructure. And lastly, of course, engaging in budget advocacy is important because of the substantial economic and equity and security that allows for us to live full and healthy lives. So one of the things that we like to uplift here within the Reimagine LA Coalition is really thinking about, rather than prioritizing adequate funding for essential resources such as housing, transportation, healthcare, and education, our governments across all levels typically disproportionately allocate funds to unjust policing and incarceration systems. And this unjust distribution of resources really has a profound impact on our Black, Brown, and Indigenous community members, as well as our comrades who are experiencing homelessness. And to the right, you'll see a quick snapshot, right? For example, Black people account for about 8% of LA County's population, but they also account for about 34% of people experiencing homelessness and 41% of those that are diagnosed with unmet mental health needs in our jails. And that's problematic. And so we really want to underscore a few things for you all when thinking about budget advocacy. One being that a budget is an administrative tool for operating a large enterprise. It's also a legislative process that's legally required of our government entities. And third, it's a published document that is usually produced annually. I say usually because sometimes our government entities miss the book, but usually they're produced annually, and they can come more frequently than an annual process. And so here's a quick overview of the LA County budget cycle. Typically in October to January, this is when our county departments begin to curate their budget proposals to submit to the, for example, to submit to the CO here in Los Angeles County. And then in January and March is when our county departments begin to send in their proposals. For Los Angeles County specifically, they typically submit them by January. But give or take for other county and other jurisdiction, they have about January to March. In April is when we'll see the CEO present a recommended budget to the Board of Supervisors. So this is after they've taken into consideration the request of each of the county departments and the board policies and board priorities of the county. May, which is where we find ourselves now, is when the Board of Supervisors will hold a public budget hearing. This is an opportunity for community members to really show up and give voice to their priorities and to give voice to what they want to see funded in the LA County budget. For us in Los Angeles, this will be taking place next Wednesday on May 15th at 9:30 a.m. June is when the budget deliberations begin. So after having taken in the county department's budget proposals and their request, after having heard from community members at the budget hearing, and after taking into considerations the questions and concerns of the Board of Supervisors, they will then deliberate on the budget itself. And that's when we'll also find out about the final budget that the board is looking to approve. And so this is the budget that is submitted and becomes quote unquote final. But it doesn't end there. There's a slight opportunity for any changes pending what we see coming down from the state, which my colleagues at Civilytics and Catalyst California will speak to a little bit about. But there's often changes that are reflected at the state level that will then be implemented during the supplemental budget phase, which will be released in October. And so who are some of the key players within Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors? This includes Hilda Solis, Holly Mitchell, Lindsay Horvath, Janice Hahn, and Catherine Barger. And you'll see their associated districts underneath their titles. Hilda Solis oversees these cities and communities within the 1st District. Holly Mitchell oversees these districts and unincorporated areas within the 2nd District. Lindsay Horvath oversees these cities and communities within the 3rd District. It's a lot of ground to cover. Janice Hahn oversees these cities and communities within the 4th District. And last but certainly not least, Catherine Barger oversees these cities and communities within the 5th District. Each of which all come together with their own values and their own set of priorities that they typically bring into the budgetary decision-making process. They also typically try to lean on their constituents to say, you know, we're getting a lot of calls regarding this, or we're getting a lot of calls regarding that. And they'll also take that into consideration for the budget. So they say. And then lastly, another important key component is the LA County CEO. Her name is Fezia Davenport, and she is responsible for managing the strategic direction and the day-to-day operations of the nation's largest municipal government, including the oversight of the Los Angeles County's 43, which are now $44 billion budget, and continues to grow. And so here are a few opportunities for community members to really plug in and track what's happening with our county taxpayer dollars and the county's budget. Plugging into the Board of Supervisors meetings, the Public Safety Cluster meetings, Probation Oversight Commission, where a lot of the budgetary decisions are made regarding law enforcement, correctional facilities, Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission, the Gender Responsive Advisory Committee, of course, the Care First Community Investment Committee, which is formerly known as the Measure J Advisory Committee, and the Public Safety Realignment Team. And these are just a few. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. There are a host of other cluster meetings that occur as well. I also want to highlight a few wins within Los Angeles that speak specifically to budgeting and why budget advocacy is important. For example, in Los Angeles City, the People's Budget LA Coalition, which is a coalition led by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, developed a People's Budget report, which detailed data, insights, and budget demands that were based on engagement with thousands upon thousands of Angelenos, and really pushed for a participatory budgeting at the city level. As a result of their advocacy, there has been the implementation of the City of LA's LA Repair Pilot Participatory Budgeting Process, which ultimately launched in 2022, nearly 2 years after the People's Budget LA report was released. And of course, our work within the Reimagine LA Coalition, which organized for the passage of Measure J, which included community members, those most impacted by incarceration, and so on and so forth, to really uplift their budgetary ideas around public safety within and alternatives to incarceration within Los Angeles County. And as a result, we continue to support the implementation of Measure J and Care First Community Investment, as well as uplift our work around the Care First Budget Survey and proposals that inform our county's Care First vision. And here's just a quick snapshot of some of our budgetary demands. Of course, closing down Men's Central Jail, fully funding Care First Community Investment, funding the Care First budget, funding Youth Justice Reimagined, and committing to building a Care First vision through authentic community collaboration, power sharing, and participatory budgeting to ensure consistent and equitable investment. And I will pass it back to my colleagues at Civilytics to share a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much, Megan. Hello, everyone. It is great to be with you all this evening. Well, it's evening for me. It's early afternoon, late afternoon for you all. But yeah, I'm Jared Knowles. I'm with Civilytics Consulting, and I'm going to try to, in 30 minutes, put the tremendously large Los Angeles County budget into perspective for you to help make the rest of the presentation have the right context for us all. So I work at a company called Civilytics that I founded in 2016. And one of the joys of that work is doing work like this. This is my third year, I think, presenting on the Los Angeles County budget to the RELA Coalition. And every year we learn new things together about the Los Angeles County budget. But we work with budget organizations across the country. We also do education research and data analysis. So the budget is tens of billions of dollars. And for us, that is a very hard thing to wrap our minds around, tens of billions of dollars. Just like, the size of the planets or something, it's so large and abstract that it doesn't have any grounding in our real life. But it's really important when we advocate that we kind of build an understanding for what it means to be built tens of billions of dollars. So I'm going to try to provide that for us here. One way to think about it is that it's over $4,700 per every single person living in Los Angeles County, including children, right? So that's how much money the county is responsible for spending every single year, $4,700 for every person in LA County. And most of that money comes from the people who live in LA County, who are paying taxes and getting charged fees by the government. And that money is something that the county has the most say over what it can do. But the total dollars here, at this point in the budget cycle, is $45.3 billion. I'm going to try to put that in context by looking at other really big dollar numbers. One way to think about it is LA County's budget is as big as the global sales of Porsche Motor Group, Porsche cars, Coca-Cola, the soft drink company, and Goldman Sachs, the vampire squid bank. Only 11 companies on Earth have annual earnings, which is revenue minus costs, larger than $45 billion. And LA County's budget is actually larger than the Federal Department of Justice or NASA. So every year, the folks that Megan mentioned are responsible for divvying up as much money as these large enterprises, these globally recognizable brands that we're all aware of. So the first thing for us to all understand when we're talking about the budget is $45 billion is a lot of money. And you can do amazing things with $45 billion a year. When the supervisors say we don't have enough money, remind them that NASA, Coca-Cola, Porsche would all be very happy to have $45 billion in annual revenue a year. That's the scale of things that we're talking about in Los Angeles County. So let's see what the CEO says about this huge amount of resources that the county is able to marshal. So we'll first step into the spin zone because at this phase in the budget cycle, as Megan introduced to us, is the beginning. And at the beginning, there's a lot of spinning that's happening right now. So the first thing the CEO wants to highlight is that the budget is down. This is a slide from the CEO's presentation. It's slide number 2. So it's the most important thing that she wants to say. She starts right out of the gate by saying, we don't have enough money, right? That's the framing that we're taking. So the budget is $1.4 billion less than last year's final adopted budget. Okay. So the budget's down. 1.4 billion is a lot of money to be down. So our question is that true? Is that what's really happening? And the answer is no. Last year at this time, the budget was also much lower. At the recommended budget phase, the budget in Los Angeles County is always low. And so last year at this time, the budget was $42.9 billion, and now we're at $45.3 billion. The reason it's lower is that the final adopted budget includes the adjustments that happen in the next phases of the budget cycle. And those adjustments almost always tend to add to the budget. So it is true that the budget's smaller than the final budget that was passed last year, but it's much larger than the budget was at this same stage in the budget cycle last year. So that's a bit of spin that's happening. The second thing we have to talk about is the second way the county government would like you to believe that there's not as much money as you want there to be or think there is they really want to focus on money that doesn't have any strings attached to it. And you're going to hear much more from this later, but I'm going to talk about this term net county cost. which roughly translates in budget jargon to the money that's generated locally in Los Angeles, predominantly from property taxes, but also from other types of local fees and taxes. And that number winds up being about $11.5 billion or $1,200 per resident. And it is less than it was in the 2023-24 final budget, but it's more than it was at the same stage in the budget cycle last year when it was only $10.7 billion. So what is important to know is that the supplemental budget will be additive. That will happen later in the year. And we can even see this. This is a screenshot from the county's own budget explainer, which is this cheesy video. I recommend you go to it later about how to open a lemonade stand or something using county money. But it ends with this story, and it says, "Remember, in LA County, another budget phase is always right around the corner." So it is true that all of this talk of constraint that the county CEO is doing, but the county is also reminding us that they're actually always adding on to the budget later on as well. So they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouths there. Net county cost is critical because it's the dollar amount that the county has the least political arguments about why they can't do things with it. It's not tied to state statute. It's not tied to federal grants. There's not strings attached to it. It is really the money that the Board of Supervisors, if they wanted to, they could open a public version of Disney World called LA County Board of Supervisors World. They could build it, operate it, and run it with this money if they kept getting elected to do so. That's complete freedom for them to be able to do that. So this is the money that's really up for political debate. So it's the money that's not tied to any specific services. And again, it's this piece of jargon. Instead of saying our checkbook, they call it net county cost. And so again, that's 11.5 billion. So smaller than the 45 billion, but still a mind-bogglingly large number. So let's put that into perspective. 11.5 billion is roughly the annual global revenue of the Caesars Entertainment Casino, the Hershey Chocolate Company, or the Chewy dog and cat and pet food provider, delivery and logistics company. There's only 101 companies globally that have annual earnings, which is revenue minus cost, larger than 11.5 billion. So LA County could be in the Fortune 500. And it's larger than many well-known federal agencies like the National Science Foundation, the Federal Communications Commission, or the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's much larger than the SEC, for example. So it's a really large amount of money. So another way to think about it is when they say that they don't have that much money, remember that there's a casino, a giant casino chain, a pet supply company, and a global candy brand that would consider that a good or great year of annual revenue for their entire operation. That's what the Board of Supervisors and the CEO are working with. So that second thing that's important is that we need to talk about what they do with that money. What are they choosing to do with that money? What does that tell us? One thing to do and to note is to pay attention to how the county uses all of its money and how it uses the most precious dollars, the net county cost. So on the left, these are from the CEO's budget. On the left, we see that out of 45.3 billion, the CEO is allocating about 24% to what it calls public protection, which we'll see is the sheriff, the probation department, etc. Not really things that the folks on this call or the folks advocating for a Care First budget would consider protection, but that's the words that the county uses. But when we look at net county costs, something funny happens. Now, of the net county cost, those public protection functions are consuming more than 1 out of every $3. So of the things that the county has the most choice over what to spend its money on, the single largest category it spends its money on is policing, probation, and jailing. And that's really an important fact that we heard from Megan, that the budget tells us. It's a mirror about the ethics of the people in charge. And we can see that when they have the most control of their money, they give more money to those entities. In fact, the county's proposing to spend $700 for every person in LA County, including children, on what it calls law and justice. And this is a chart that breaks that down by the department. The single largest law and justice department is the sheriff's department at $403 per person, $116 per person on probation, $54 on the DA, and $53 on healthcare for people involved in the correctional system. In contrast, the county is going to spend just $23 per resident on justice care opportunities, the JCOD program, which we'll talk about later in this presentation. So that's $6.7 billion in spending on those carceral activities. The sheriff alone this year, for the first time, the budget crossed the $4 billion line. So now the sheriff is getting $3.9 billion from what's known as the general fund, plus another $180 million from a variety of smaller special revenue funds, including state grants and things like that. The single largest contributor to the sheriff's budget, though, is the county, the Board of Supervisors, paying $1.9 billion of the sheriff's budget from the net county cost. That's $198 per person. So about 1 in every 6 local dollars, local unrestricted dollars in LA County go to the sheriff department alone. So 1 out of every $6 that the Board of Supervisors has the most control over, has the most flexibility to do anything they want with, they choose to give to the sheriff's department. The remainder of it comes from state aid. And a lot of that money is money that the Board of Supervisors could choose to do other things with too. Prop 172 public safety funding gives them $828 million. And they also get money from the AB 109 Public Safety Realignment Fund at $267 million. There's actually plenty of flexibility for the Board of Supervisors to do other safety promoting activities with that than give that to the sheriff, but they do choose to give that amount to the sheriff. Less than 1% of the sheriff's budget is federal funds. So the federal government has nothing really to say about the LA County Sheriff and isn't paying a meaningful amount of its budget. Also, some departments get to ignore their budgets. Last year, the mental health and the sheriff's department had roughly the same size of budgets, $3.7 billion total. Net county cost for the mental health office was only $77 million, whereas the sheriff got $1.8 billion. But LASD is estimated to have overspent their net county cost allocation alone by $239 million, or 13% of their total allocation. Alone, LASD's overspend would fund some of the things that people are advocating for in LA County to invest in care first. So that's the significance of the ability to overspend the budget. Other departments do not overspend their budgets by that amount. And so that's an important thing to think about. The budget is a set of rules that are supposed to be followed throughout the year, but it's clear from the past in LA County that the rules don't apply equally to all departments. So $4 billion is the floor for the sheriff in all likelihood. Probation gets another $1.5 billion. So if we folded probation into the sheriff's department, it would, be over $5.5 billion. Most of that comes from the general fund, but they do get some money from special revenue funds, some flowing through from the state. The county contributes $717 million of net county cost, which is $74 for every person in Los Angeles, to fund the probation system in Los Angeles. And again, the federal government is contributing very little, less than 3% of the budget. So everything that's being done at the will and discretion of the Board of Supervisors, the CEO, and the sheriff. Last year, when I presented, there was a lot of folks asking questions about the Office of Diversion and Reentry. So we looked into that. And the CEO has said, well, we decided, this is the CEO's words, this office was incorporated in the community programs budget unit within the Department of Health Services, which will support consolidation of ODR's fiscal activities under one budget unit in order to, emphasis added by me, increase transparency, improve efficiency, and avoid duplicative efforts. It's very rare that if you take a department that exists on its own and you fold it into a subunit within another unit, you increase transparency. Now, that's a plain move to hide the ODR's budget. So let's see if we can transparently find out how much diversion and reentry services is allocated in the budget. No, we know way less now, thanks to this move, than we did last year about ODR's budget. And we can see the total amount spent on the Housing for Health program, diversion and reentry, and other related community programs together. And we can see that at best, ODR is going to be receiving $11 per resident. But that'd be if it's getting all of the money that all those other things are folded into. So for all we know, this could be a substantial reduction in the size of ODR, and we know it's not a substantial increase. The other department I wanted to talk about is the Justice Care Opportunities Department. I have the mission statement up here. One thing that's interesting is that, like I mentioned, the Sheriff and Probation Department get a large share of state funding from the 2011 Public Safety Realignment, AB 109 funding, which is a very large stream of money that the state pays to all counties in Los Angeles to carry out public safety work on their behalf. LA County gets $3 billion in AB 109 from the state. And the Board of Supervisors have wide discretion about how to allocate that $3 billion, which is $314 per resident. And we saw that a lot of that is going to, hundreds of millions of that are going to the sheriff and the probation. So how much do we think that they have decided to give to JCOD this year? The answer is 66 cents per resident. So that's less than enough to buy 2 stamps anymore, whereas they're giving hundreds of dollars per resident to the sheriff's department and the probation department. So that's a choice that they're making, even about money they have actually a lot of flexibility over, and they're not raising. That's state money that's coming from the state of California. They're not giving that to JCOD either. So this naturally means that JCOD's budget is lower than it was last year. And last year it was unable to spend its entire budget and didn't have enough staff to carry out its budget. Staffing is critical. This is really boring budget stuff, but really important for us all to grasp in making our demands. It takes a lot of people to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. And one classic budget trick that's been playing out in Los Angeles that the Board of Supervisors has been playing is to allocate dollars and not people. And if you just think about the effort it would take for you to spend $1 billion, you actually have to fill out a lot of paperwork. You have to go to the bank a lot. You have to write a lot of checks. You have to call a lot of people on the phone. It takes a lot of effort. And that's without thinking about red tape or even wanting to do a good job, which we would hope that the people in charge of this money would want to do. JCOD right now has 100 staff. They requested 219 staff from the county, and the CEO decided that she's going to recommend they only get 124 staff, whereas the sheriff's department has 17,000 staff, to put that in context. And from the budget itself, it says the department's critical and unmet needs include $9.8 million for 46 positions to establish the new independent pretrial services agency, among its other needs. And that they're not getting the 46 positions, for example. They're only getting 24 new staff members. You're going to hear more about Care First from Mayanna, so I'm not going to talk too much about that, except to put it in this context. It's a $54 per resident right now, but it's really important to remember that because the county hasn't been doing a good job of staffing Care First agencies and departments and providing them the resources they need to spend the money, over $200 million of this budget is rolled over from last year. It's not new money. And that's out of 524 million. So there's 524 million budgeted in Care First, but over 200 million of it was unspent last year. That's money that they said they were going to do things for Care First with. They didn't get that money out on the street, working, providing services to people, helping them get well, that they weren't able to do that. And so they rolled it over. Because without staff, the CFCI is going to struggle to spend funds. These are the areas recommended for CFCI funding and the estimated amount that they spent. I've highlighted JCOD here, which is estimated to have only spent 24% of its $214 million budget. just not able to get the money out the door. But actually, only the two of the smaller allocations were able to spend 100% of their money, and the rest are spending around 50% or less of all of their money that they're allocated under this program because they're not getting the staffing that. Because what gets staffed gets done in government, in group projects at school, in any context. You need staff to get things done. People have to be at work. The county has a lot of staff. It has 116,159 people. I said the sheriff has 17,000. It actually probably has more. It has staff sprinkled throughout the budget, including 2,561 people who are providing health services to people in jail. So they may not work for the sheriff, but because of the sheriff's activity, they are required. And the juvenile court health department, which are listed as staff for the health services department. And again, JCOD is there. I've circled it with only 124 employees recommended for the next budget. And it's also important, it's important to highlight the recommended budget is a document that is full of spin. The CEO highlights adding 24 independent pretrial service staff to the JCOD budget. But actually, if you look at the budget, the 24 positions are for all of JCOD, not the independent pretrial services agency. So it's a bit of a sleight of hand to say, oh, I'm going to put 24 new people to work on the independent pretrial services, but actually that is just one of the line items that they could work underneath the budget. And so that's also an important thing to highlight. And again, 24 out of 116,000 employees is not a meaningful. We're going to hear more about that stuff from Mayanna, and I'm glad to see that on the agenda. I'm going to talk now just a little bit about the state budget's impact on LA County, because I'm sure if you've been following budgets, if the word budget is a Google alert for you, you've been hearing about a lot of alarm bells going off about the California state budget. So the state does have a massive budget deficit estimated. So it's estimated between 38 and $73 billion in deficit, which puts the shortfall between 16.8 and 32.4% of the total budget last year. So that's like having your checkbook be misbalanced by, almost $1 out of every $3. So that's a pretty big shortfall. But you also see it's quite a big range. People can't agree. Is it 38 billion or 73 billion? There's a pretty big difference between those two numbers. My point would be that deficit math, when you hear people talk about government deficits, the math is always a little fishy. And there are scarier things than deficits happening in LA County. The county CEO highlights in her budget transmittal letter that AB 218, the Child Victims Act, is a much more real and present danger to the financial security of LA County, because rough estimates say that the latest information put the county's financial exposure, quoting from the budget, at more than $3 billion from claims alleging childhood sexual assault at various county and non-county facilities. Because of the gravity of these claims and the staggering potential liability, we are assessing the impact this will have on the county. $3 billion. It's important to note when the CEO sent her transmittal letter, that's the first thing that she named as a budget pressure. She named 4 things, and the rising cost of litigation is the number one thing. Both the unsettled up to $3 billion, maybe more, liability that we just talked about, and also the rising costs of settlements that the county paid last year and is expecting to pay this year. These are scarier to the CEO than the state budget deficit, which doesn't get much of a mention in her fiscal outlook, because the county relies on more stable state revenue streams like vehicle registration taxes and things like that, and less on taxes on capital gains, which is what a large part of the state budget relies on. The county's exposure to the state budget deficit is lower. We'll know a lot more when the next version of the budget comes out, and hopefully the folks in Sacramento have narrowed down the range of the budget deficit. But it's important to note that settlement costs are more scary to the folks in leadership in LA County. And that makes sense because last year they paid $1 billion to settle a variety of claims and risk penalties that they occurred. They have an annual legal expense at about $340 million. And they have this chart which made news in LA earlier this year, showing which departments have the largest exposure to litigation expenses. And we see the sheriff's department leads the pack by quite a bit at $150 million. So not to really we could you can talk about whether you want to do anything about that or not, but this is what's worrying the CEO. So it's helpful to know that the CEO and the board are more worried about this than they are about the state budget deficit, at least right now from everything they're saying publicly. So we just did a lot of math. We talked a lot about a lot of really big numbers, but hopefully this is what we take away. The county is a humongous financial enterprise. It has wide discretion over investing not just billions, but possibly tens of billions of dollars every single year. The county is continuing to expand its investment in those dollars in policing and probation. The sheriff's department continues to not follow the budget that it's given and overspend its budget allocation. And the county is failing to fully fund JCOD and has not shown a commitment to staffing CFCI programs in a way that allows them to fully spend their money. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I believe I will try to answer some questions in the chat really quick. But I'm based on the East Coast, so I was getting late here. But it was great to be with you all. And if there are follow-up questions, I'm sure the RELA team can help get folks' questions answered. Thank you, everyone, for having me tonight. It was really great to be here.
Thank you, Jared. That was great information. For the Q&A, we do have a section for that coming up pretty soon. So please continue to put your questions in the chat and we will address them soon. We now turn to what this budget means for justice reinvestment work. I'm going to give it over to my colleague, Mayana Kafani King from Catalyst to go over the impact on CFCI work.
Thank you so much, Kiana, and thank you, Jared and Megan. We really had a great foundation. This next section, I'm going to be talking about the budget for fiscal year 25 and how it relates to our Care First community investments. So first, we'll give a little introduction. I'm going to do a review of Measure J, then go into what we're seeing for Care First community investments, and then give a little bit more of rehashing on budget timeline and actionable next steps. So I'm from Catalyst, California, and we're a racial justice data and research and policy organization that strives for a world where systems are designed not only for justice, but to support equitable access to resources and opportunities for all Californians to thrive. Our mission is really to advocate for racial justice by building power and transforming public systems. And we do this by partnering with communities of color, conducting innovative research, developing policies for actionable change, and then also shifting money and power back into our communities. And we have 5 program areas: educational equity, equity and community investment, the political voice team, Reimagine justice and safety, and race counts. I am on the equity and community investments team, and we're a team that works to shift money and power back into our communities. And we focus on equipping BIPOC communities with the tools necessary to win sustainable investment by conducting in-depth budget analysis, funding transparency and accountability, and also budget training and capacity building. So we are really the budget team here at Catalyst. And we talked about local budget basics, but just want to hash in that local budgets are forward-looking financial plans. They're a projection of what will happen and where investments will be. They're supposed to be a reflection of our priorities and our values, but often they are not. And that's why this work in spaces like this are so important, so we can have budget advocacy, so we can make sure our budgets reflect our values and our priorities as a community. So getting into some budget terms for this next section. So a fiscal year, as Jared and Megan touched on, is the time period for a city or county. We're talking about a county budget, LA County, which begins July 1st of a calendar year and ends June 30th of the following year. So we're currently still in fiscal year 24, but we're looking at budget fiscal year 25, which will start on July 1st. So that's the budget that Jared just went over, fiscal year 25. Revenue is money that's coming in, and that includes taxes, fees, grants, and different things coming from state or federal government. So when Jared was talking about, the federal government isn't taking a big interest in the certain things when we're talking about the sheriff's budget or probation, he's talking about different revenues that are coming into LA County. The opposite is expenditures. That's money going out. You want to think about that as how the county is spending its dollars. And we saw in Jared's presentation that they're making big investments into the carceral system, into probations, into things that are not care first or community. Lastly, Jared also touched on net county costs, and we're going to talk about this a little bit when we talk about Measure J, and it's our flexible dollars within the general fund. This can be used for community programming. This is why we advocate for these dollars. There are no strings attached. This is also known as our locally generated revenues, and a large part of this fund are property taxes. And we're going to get into what locally generated revenues or unrestricted revenues means when we talk about Measure J. And then lastly, we went over this a little bit. I'm just going to touch a little bit more on the different phases of the budget cycle. So we are talking about the recommended budget. And this is the first draft of the budget that the CEO or the Chief Executive Officer creates and presents to the board. This usually comes out mid-April. This year it came out April 22nd and was presented to the board on April 23rd. And this is what the budget hearings and deliberations of this draft is based on. The next phase is the adopted budget. So this is the budget that's adopted and approved by the board in June. So any changes made between the recommended budget that came out in April and then what's adopted in June is what you see in this adopted budget. All those changes will be there. And that's what will start our July 1st fiscal 25 budget cycle. And then lastly, we have the supplemental budget, which are our mid-year adjustments that'll come out in October. This is usually any additional funding or one-time investment, and there's usually less budget advocacy and any transparency really around this. We see a lot happening around the recommended budget and less happening with the supplemental budget. Getting a little bit into Measure J. So the history of Measure J, a Care First vision for Los Angeles was really decades of work done by advocates and communities to move away from a system of harm and into a community system of care. This system includes alternatives to incarceration and reimagining public safety that does not include over-policing, violence, and surveillance. This was a community initiative to ensure that needed community programming has sustainable funding to provide services. So this was initiated and pushed by community members and advocates. It was intended to fund needed community care programming, and that included programming to help decrease the jail population, diversion and reentry services, trauma-informed wrapped-around services, mental health supports, youth development, and economic and workforce development supports, and more. This was approved by voters in 2020, and for Measure J to be adopted by the Los Angeles County Charter to really invest in our communities. So what did Measure J do? Measure J was a permanent allocation of at least 10%, and that set aside was of our locally generated unrestricted revenues. And we'll talk a little bit more about why unrestricted is in parentheses here. And that was to be directed towards community investment and alternatives to incarceration. So we have our 10% set aside. Measure J dollars cannot be used for law enforcement priorities. So this is money that can't be put into the sheriff's department, can't be put into probation, anything that has carceral harms to our community. And Measure J dollars are to be allocated through a thoughtful community engagement process administered by an advisory board to recommend how those dollars should be spent. So in short, Measure J is a community-centered budgeting process that is for community, by community, to community. So getting into what does our 10% mean? And there's two different versions of this. We have the 10% of what budget advocates and coalitions such as Reimagine LA, and honestly what the voters intended and understood when they voted yes on Measure J, versus what the county is allocating and saying is the 10%. So we're gonna go over both versions. But we do want to set the stage as highlighting what our NCC and where the 10% is coming from. It's coming from our net county costs. This is the fund that Jared uplifted before, where we talked about being our most flexible. In this fiscal year, it is 11.5 billion. What we want to uplift is this should be an annual look at what the 10% is, right? So whatever our net county cost estimation is for that year is where we take the 10%. So this calculation is once we estimate what our NCC is for this fiscal year is 11.5 billion, that's where we stop. We stop there, we take our 10%, and that's what we get for our Measure J set aside. So our calculation is NCC divided by 10% equals Measure J. And for this fiscal year, if we were using this calculation, it would be upwards, well, around $1.2 billion. Right? So we get NCC, we stop there, act like there's a big red stop sign, we take 10% and we get Measure J. What the county does is they add an extra step here. So instead of estimating what NCC comes and stops, they then decide actually 11.5 billion isn't our NCC. Our NCC is our restricted minus our unrestricted, because in the language they put locally generated unrestricted funds. So they are justifying that the language said unrestricted funds so that they can now say, oh, there's restricted funding within NCC that has to be subtracted from our restricted funds. What is improper here is that when we're talking about revenues, when you start thinking about the restricted funds that have to be paid out, you're now talking about expenditures, right? So we talked about revenues are coming in, expenditures are coming out. When we voted on Measure J, we weren't saying, oh, we have to think about what the county is already on the hook for and take away from our NCC. Our NCC are revenues, property taxes that our community and residents are paying. That's where the 10% is from. The county is now saying, no, our NCC isn't 11.5 billion. It's whatever our restricted minus our unrestricted funds are. And we won't know what that is until the CEO office decides to tell the advisory body what number that is. And so in the bottom half of this slide, you see that it then goes, whatever is left over, you take that 10% and then you get the Measure J set aside. So those are the major two differences. So when we're saying fully fund Measure J, we're talking about our first allocation, our first calculation, go back this where you have NCC divided by the 10%, and that is what we get for Measure J. In this calculation, we're decreasing our pot of funding for NCC. So then when you take your 10%, that's an even smaller amount. Now getting into what we're actually seeing in this year's recommended budget as it pertains to Care First Community Investment. So a little bit of the history, there was a lawsuit and Measure J had to be put on pause. And during that time, the board still wanted to make sure that Care First Community Investments was the spirit of Measure J could still go on, even though Measure J had to be put on pause. So it translated into Care First Community Investment. So that's what we're seeing now. So overall, talking about the total budget, Jared touched on this a little bit, but the CEO said that there is an increase of revenue. So even though we saw that in the CEO slide that we are down from last year's final budget, we did see an increase of revenue, that's money coming in, of 390.2 million. However, this is significant, but it's at a slower rate than what we've seen in past years. So as a result, the next bullet points under talk about what are the major priorities that even though we're seeing a slower growth, we have to make sure this money is being spent on. And we see substantial increases to wages and benefits for the county's workforce. Over the past few years, there's been negotiations to increase staffing, salaries, and benefits. So a lot of that has been where this money is going to be spent on. A growing public assistance caseload, those costs. Jared talked about the legal settlements and the increase that the county has had to pay that out, and also other board priorities, including Care First community investments. So the 10% for this fiscal year of CFCI is $306 million. What we want to uplift is that the CEO is only adding 12.3 new dollars to CFCI this year. And what that means is that last year there was only about 288 million designated. That was the 10% for CFCI. So this year the 10% is only 306 million, right? So then that's showing us that only $12.3 million the CEO was able to find for our 10% calculation. Jared also talked about how we have 223 million of carryover dollars. These are unspent dollars that the CEO added on to our 10%. So the total CFCI allocation for this budget cycle is 524. So we have the 10% number, which is our $300.6 million, and then the 223 of unspent dollars from previous years that make that total 524. But for our budget advocacy, we have to, push as to why do we have such a large unspent dollars or carryover dollars. And then also the CEO classifies this as one-time investment. So if it's not spent this year, what does that mean by one-time investment? Will the money be gone? How can we ensure that the staff is there and that the programs that our community needs can really be funded and set up for success? So some other additional investments that we see is our independent pretrial services and also our Department of Justice consent decree. So for our independent trial services, we see an addition of 24 staff and also a supply of our comprehensive care management. And this is within our jails, care, and opportunities department, which is also known as JCOT. So even though this will aid in decreasing the jail population and closure of Bend Central Jail, because we know that there is a high pretrial population, which is basically criminalizing the poor and impoverished. Those are people that aren't convicted of a crime, but can't afford to leave or pay to be free. So they're just sitting in jail. So this is a step forward into helping decrease the jail population and really get that trial population out of the jail. The second we have is the DOJ consent decree, and that provides $3.9 million in ongoing funding to the Department of Health Services, specifically the Integrated Correctional Health Services, to contract mental health group into individuals in the high observation housing to receive structured out of cell time in county jails. There's an additional set aside of $9.3 million for body worn cameras to increase transparency and accountability. And what the county is saying that this investment really continues the county's commitment to improve the condition of mental health care. And what we really want to focus on is that on its face, yes, supportive services to help the mental health population can be great, but there really needs to be a shift in releasing individuals that need mental health care. People experiencing mental health issues should not be criminalized. So there needs to be more in an investment in making that shift in releasing these populations versus finding ways to add supportive care to keep people in cages. And Jared had a beautiful graph. This is just a little bit of an addition. This is how the CFCI dollars were allocated to departments. We see health services and JCOT receive significant investments, but the budget doesn't give us much past that. We don't know how CFCI dollars are being spent down within these departments, outside of some of the things that we saw for the pretrial services within JCOT. We do see that this year there isn't any funding going towards the Department of Mental Health. And then lastly, we have 57.7 million that has not been allocated. So again, an advocacy question is, why hasn't this been allocated? Is this something that's going to our third-party administrators to help dollars get directly to our communities outside of money going to departments? Giving more insight into what that means and what their plans are for this $57.7 million. And then moving into some actionable next steps, really being able to attend budget town halls like this or trainings to really help inform you of what's happening in the budget, what does the county plan on, and how they plan on spending their dollars, and has there been real community engagement and community insight with them making these decisions. Communicate with your local officials. They are public servants. They are here for you. They are elected by you. Let them know if there's things that you see that you don't like. Let them know that this is not how we want our money to be spent. It makes a difference when the phones or emails in the offices, are constantly saying like, this is not something that we want. And that really helps drive supervisors' budget priorities. Use any toolkits and other materials that help inform your decision making and how budgets are run, how they're being used, how you're able to communicate with your local officials. And then tune into budget meetings that help inform decision making and decision makers. Your voice is important. And Megan touched on this, so lightly, I will talk about the next public budget hearing is going to happen on May 15th, and Reimagine LA is having a public budget rally. So if you haven't registered, make sure you register. The final budget deliberations and adoption of the budget is scheduled to be June 24th. So any changes that can happen will happen during this meeting. And then lastly, the supplemental budget is happening on October 8th. That's when it's scheduled. This has less transparency and less action around it. So if you're able, really to plug in, this is where you'll see one-time investments, additional dollars that may come in that you can help advocate for your community. And any information, slides, questions, I will be able to give to Megan and Reimagine LA if anybody wants to contact me. And I can pass it back to Kayana.
Thank you. We now have an opportunity for a public comment training. I'm going to pass it to Jazara Holiday from Youth Justice Coalition. She will go over the tips and for public commenting.
Hello, everybody. Give me 2 seconds while I share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through a really quick public comment training. And then at the end, I'm going to show you a video of basically a live public comment. So what to expect at the Board of Supervisors. So you will be called up when the board takes up the item that you sign up to speak on. So initially, like when you go in, there's like a kiosk that you go and you sign up for your item. And then when your item comes up, they'll call you up by first and last name. You typically have 1 to 2 minutes to speak. Have your comments prepared and readily available. If you're unable to finish your comments, you can always submit them a printed copy to the board. They have like a link that you could send it to. A good public comment consists of, number 1, address your audience, so the board, state your name and the district that you live in, clearly state your demands, humanize the issue, provides alternatives, and repeat it over and over again. Never forget to repeat your demands or the reason that you're there in the first place. If you can advocate, you can influence. If you can influence, you can change lives. Give me 1 second. How to prepare. Make sure you have enough background knowledge, who, what, when, where, why. So who you're talking to, what about, when, where, why, how. Tie in your personal story. So myself, I'm formerly incarcerated. So I'm a system impacted youth. So I tend to tie my personal story into my public comment and into the topic. Add data and facts to back up what you're saying. Got nerves. So I tend to get nervous. For myself, I'm kind of nervous right now. And it's hot, so it's kind of playing a role in there. But when you nervous, I tend to kind of like maybe sometimes rush through. So you'll maybe sometimes miss your point because you're focusing on the nerves. So in order to help that, practice your comment and focus on the cause. The first time is really scary. So to all my first timers, it's okay to feel those nerves. Like I said, especially in front of a lot of people. Some ways to calm those nerves are deep breaths, remind yourself why your comment and your voice is so important, focusing on each of your points. So again, making sure that you hit all your points and your demands and why you're there is stated clear. Give me 1 second. I don't have a slide after that, so I will go with questions. Actually, hold on, there is a slide, the video. There we go.
My name is Josiah Holiday from Youth Justice Coalition. I was one of those juvenile kids that got locked up in 2019. I come from South Central LA where I got into fights where I fought teachers and everything else. I'm standing here 21 years old today, January 18th, as a changed person thanks to Youth Justice Coalition. When you invest in a youth's education, childhood trauma, get down to the bottom of everything that's going on, you can change a person. So you saying that the 30 people in there versus the 90 people that actually want to get out, what if those 30% is lost and don't know where to start like I was? I hated myself and I hated everybody around me because I didn't know how to process or get through anything that I had going on. So for you to say because 90% are trying or showing some type of effort, whatever the case may be, you don't know what those 30% go through when they get home. You don't know what they're gonna go through. They like to start all over again, just like that. You don't know about their parents, you don't know nothing that's going on. And y'all don't ever try to get down to the deep problem. No, nothing, no enforcing trauma and stuff is not okay, right? But 13, 14 years old and you're growing up in a house that's filled with trauma, where are you gonna go out in the world and produce? What are you going to go out in the world and produce? Exactly, trauma. So when you get those skills of helping and love and care that children deserve because you're a child, I am still a child at 21 years old. I still, when something happened, I still go look for my mom. I still go look for YJC for the resources because I need help. Kids are always going to need help. There's no time that you should ever give up on a child.
So that was my public comment. I was nervous in the beginning, but I was also like kind of really upset. And I kind of used my emotions to that advantage to like empower my public comment. So yeah, that's an example for you all. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them.
Thank you for that. And also thank you for sharing that video. It was very powerful. We're going to move on to the Q&A section of this meeting. I'm going to invite Brian from the California United for a Responsible Budget. He will lead this section and you're able to ask any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Kiana. Hi, everybody. Great to be with you tonight, and so happy to see so many familiar and new faces. Like Kiana said, I'm Brian Caneda from Californians United for a Responsible Budget, or CURB. I'm the Deputy Director, and we're also one of the founding members of the Reimagine LA County Coalition. I want to thank all of our presenters and a special shout out to Jared, who answered a lot of the questions in the chat. I wanted to bring forth a couple of them we can add a little more color to. And if people have more questions they want to ask, go ahead and use the raise hand function, and we'll go around to individuals one by one, or you can still drop your question in the chat. And I'm going to circle back here to a question that Kathleen Hernandez was asking. And that was about, can all this money that we're talking about, these billions and billions going through the counties, can they be placed in the communities? And can these community-based programs be determined locally? And Jared mentioned that there are already folks in this coalition that are working on just that. And I'm wondering if folks want to talk a little bit about participatory budgeting, which is a democratic process where community members get to decide how to spend part of a public budget. Any folks want to talk about participatory budgeting with our friends here at the town hall? Megan, go ahead.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, this is a really great question. I think the sense of community deciding on how to spend their taxpayer dollars and how to spend a specific amount of money is really core and central to our advocacy as the Reimagine LA Coalition. We want to see this happen at the level of CFCI, and I think Mayana really underscored this really well: for us, by us, with us, right? And so we have been really sowing seeds of this concept of participatory budgeting, which is really the idea of co-governance with regard to budgeting at all levels, right? So we are seeding a pilot here in Los Angeles County with Supervisorial District 2, where they have chosen 2 unincorporated areas to really allow community members within those regions to decide how they spend a specific amount of money. So both leveraging the discretionary dollars at the county level and leveraging philanthropic dollars as well to really come together and say, we know this works. This is what it looks like to allow community members to really decide what works best for their communities. The general idea, obviously, we have that down packed, but every community is slightly different, right? And so new ideas, new concepts come out. And I think that is really, again, like the work of this coalition is to really push for more community engagement, to push for more opportunities for residents to really decide directly how our dollars are spent.
Thanks for that, Megan, and thanks for the work that folks in the Reimagine LA Coalition, shout out to La Defensa, other organizations who've been working really hard on PB pilot for us to expand hopefully throughout the county and increase folks' access to this democratic budgetary process, or what ought to be a democratic budgetary process. Awesome. We had another question, I think it was during Mayana's presentation. This is from Dina. What does restricted exactly mean? Is this a new definition implemented after Measure J? I would not, Dina, put it past the county to come up with new terms just to try to take our money away from us, but it is in fact a well-known budget term, even though we're maybe disputing how it's being used. Mayana, do you want to talk a little bit about restricted versus unrestricted funds?
Yes, so restricted funds means that there are strings attached. So restricted funds have to be spent a certain kind of way. You can't now decide, oh, I want to spend these dollars that should go to mental health services now to transportation or to street cleaning. So restricted dollars means there's a certain way this money has to be spent and you can't divert that. Versus unrestricted funds like our net county costs or dollars that are in our general fund, those can be spent any kind of way. There's no rules, no strings. And so those are the difference between the two.
Thank you
I
so much. Go ahead, Megan.
I can add a little bit of color to this as well. There are like contractual obligations that the county holds, which are typically costs that are associated with like operating agreements and department building leases and like really boring stuff like that. There's also like fixed employee benefits. So like Anna said, like it can't be used for something else. So this is like a fixed cost portion of the budget. There's also like legal obligations and debt that comes up with the county. So this is the amount of money that's kind of committed so that they can pay for court settlements, judgments, damages. So like really all of the boring stuff. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Megan. Yeah, who'd be restricting these funds? Because we need them to get unrestricted real fast for some of these departments. All right. And Kathleen naming in the chat, just like we should have been all taught to manage our money, we should have been taught about these city, county, state, and federal budgets, because this is where the sausage gets made, folks. Any other questions from folks? I think we got everything from the chat. Trying to see if there's any hands up. And seeing none, I'm going to thank everyone for their, oh, Tim, I got one last question. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm trying to thank you so much, everyone, for your energy and your questions. You're just amazing. One of the ways I'm thinking about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like, that we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas type of mentality, right? Like, so because we know that like cops and the sheriff's unions and those folks always say like, well, crime's up, public safety is at risk. But from what I'm hearing, the last 4 years has been very minimal in terms of the actual investments to prevent crime and systematic issues. Is this like a correct metaphor to use when I'm thinking about this?
Yeah, does anyone have a reaction to Tim? Kathleen, was that a direct reaction to Tim?
No.
Let me see if anybody wants to respond.
I was actually going to pass it to you, Brian, if you wanted to take a stab at this here.
Yeah, well, Tim, what's at the core of what's the core of what you're asking?
I mean, because from what I'm seeing in terms of how popular mainstream media and narratives about Los Angeles is that crime is up, people feel unsafe, and voters will respond accordingly in upcoming elections. But what I'm hearing from these sessions, and also last week at the Vera Institute Crown Diamonds, meeting, is that like there's the progress on this side to actually transfer funding towards restorative justice programming has been very helter-skelter, uneven, and not fully implemented at scale to even get to that level of safety that we all deserve. And so that's causing the tension that I really want to make sure like I'm on the right side of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things at play, and what we're all working to identify, I think, in coalition with each other is not only the gaps, but the obstacles in order to create this new vision for public safety that everyone's talking about. And right now we see issues with the CEO's office, right? We know that a budget is a statement of our values, yet they don't seem to be prioritizing the dollars necessary in order to address the crisis that the county is facing. And really it is a crisis. And we have this calculation that folks shared with us, 10% of net county costs, but that's the floor. It's not the ceiling. If you all read the Care First budget that Reimagine LA has co-created and Justice LA has created in the past, really we're talking about billions of investment that's due to our communities and long overdue. So we don't want to get too caught up in the math, because really they need to be spending whatever is necessary. When we're thinking about housing, we're thinking about housing first and people's resistance to permanent supportive housing, people's underinvestment in permanent supportive housing. We really are working to identify, what are the core issues that are preventing us from actualizing this vision. And that situation, for instance, like I can think of NIMBYism is a real big deal, that we have the money, some of this money is caught up in places, and we have the ideas, we have the vision, but we can't get people to let us build housing with services in their neighborhoods. So I think if for folks who were at the California Endowment Vera event about ATI, I think it was really it's a really good reset to understand that there has actually been progress made. The jail population is lower than what it used to be. We have seen almost $400 million go out the door for community-based care through CFCI, but that we're nowhere near the place where we need to be. And we won't get there until there is the political will that acknowledges the emergency that the county faces. And I think our job as advocates is to bring that emergency into relief for the LA County Board of Supervisors. It's just like, keep fighting. Keep fighting. They don't got it together, and we got to keep fighting. And I'm going to send it over to Kathleen.
Yeah, I so appreciate y'all. Two things with the kids in high school. This could be such a great program, and it's like we have to look at this front door and back door, because it's the incarceration that we want to get rid of, but we also have to start uplifting our youth into fitting into those positions so that they can be the case managers, they can help people through, they can have the jobs going somewhere. And I'm a former retired teacher, and I do sit on the UTLA Human Rights Committee and also on the retired steering committee, among other things, in LA County. But I would love to put forth a resolution for the teachers union to call for some of this on-hand kind of budget learning for kids to like walk out of high school into some kind of job like that, or even before. So I'd love to explore that more. I'm part of DPN, and they know how to reach me.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kathleen. And let me let folks know that Reimagine LA Coalition has a meeting twice a month called the Policy Work Group, and this is really our community space. All community members are welcome. It's the first and third Monday of the month.
That's right.
Right, first and third Monday of the month at noon. And if you'd like to be added to the email list to come to our community space, you can talk about new ideas. You can hear about some of these community-based programs and organizations that are slaying out there at the front lines. They give presentations every other week. And if you have your own ideas to bring forth in that space, that's a great space. That's a great space to do it. And I see one more question from Maria. Go ahead.
This was actually more like adding a little more color to what Tim question was. It's more of identifying, right, the way the media works. There is a very, very unique way that the media works in portraying that a lot of the crimes that are going on in, for example, in LA County in regards to retail theft, they're not necessarily being addressed the way they probably should be. And this is it's a tactic that they're using to utilize information and narrative to tell Angelenos that, hey, maybe we should retract this funding and give it all back to the sheriffs, or how are we even really moving forward? Maybe we should remove the help of Prop 47, or even move forward and even remove like the help with Prop 57. And that's not necessarily what should be done. What's going on is that the help that the community needs, it's not sustainable, because we still need a lot more. It's a lot of Angelenos that need the help, especially with mental health, homelessness. It drives them to do drastic measures, right? So if we were to able to get this funding released the way they should have released it, we would be in a faster rate on being able to help. So therefore, it's important to join these meetings, to join the coalition, to understand the process of how the budgeting is going, so that when we do go to the Board of Supervisors, we're able to let them know, like, hey, like, I'm a constituent of LA County, and this is what has been said that you were going to do. And because you haven't done it, our people are suffering out there. Our people need help. And there is a lot of lived experience led organizations that could give the help. However, because you're putting a hold and a stop, we're not able to provide the services that they need. And we also got to be mindful of the sheriff's department, for example. They don't like the fact that the funding that was removed from them is being used to actually help the communities. Because as a lived experience woman and also lived experience mom, when she reached out to help from programs that supposedly law enforcement had back when my son was only like 14, 15, there was no help, but they were sure getting the funding. So now those are things that the community really needs to be aware of, that not everything they say is true, and it's important to be educated to understand where the funding is going, being budgeted, and also how to vote and where to vote. Thank you.
Maria, thanks for that. And just a reminder to everyone who knows better to push back on this tough on crime dialogue. I'm an old head. I remember when they rolled that stuff out in the 90s. We know it didn't work. We know it was a driver of mass incarceration. And we also know what keeps us safe, right? It's jobs, housing, healthcare. We believe in care, not cages. Thank you so much, folks. I'm going to pass it back to Kayana.
Thank you. This concludes the meeting. There are a few actions you can take. Aside from Brian mentioning the policy meetings that happen, we are having a rally on May 15th at 8 a.m. during the board's budget hearing. And so the link to register for that will be in the comment section. We also have a donation link that will be linked in the comment section for anyone that is interested in providing donations to help us with our cause, as well as please follow us on all of our social medias so that you can stay updated with the work that we're doing surrounding the budget and also the Care First budget survey. We have a survey that you all can participate in, and that will also be linked in the chat for you to help us out with the survey to know what the community needs and how we can help out with that. And aside from that, just please stay up to date with us on social media. Please get involved with a lot of the budget advocacy that we are doing around this time. We really want to thank you for participating. And please, if you have any questions or you want to get involved, please reach out to us at the email that Megan dropped in the chat, and as well as the information that's being dropped in the chat as I speak. And so thank you again for participating. We appreciate you coming out today. It was wonderful to have you all and to see you. And thank you to the Reimagine LA Coalition for all your hard work for this budget town hall.